Herman Singh with us, talking about his latest book, Di-volution. So welcome, Herman.
Thank you, Alison. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much. And hi to the audience.
Yeah, so to everyone out in the audience, I mean, I think Herman, to all of you, probably needs no introduction, but I mean, one of the most experienced individuals in South Africa in the digital space, both the thinking of, what the evolution is, what the transformation is, what's to come in the future. A little bit of his CV and background. He's the CEO and runs his own organization, Future Advisory. In addition to that, he's a professor at a number of universities, both here in South Africa and internationally in the US, UCT, UJ, and then in the US, Duke, and the Center of Creative Leadership. And then over and above that, he's got many years, 30 plus years, working both with Pan-African corporates. MTN is one of them. And then in addition, he's been an entrepreneur, so knows what it feels like to be both sides of the table. His book, Di-volution, has recently hit the shelves, and I want to say it soon will be available in physical form and exclusive books. So go and grab a copy. But I think let's dive right into it, Herman, and get into some of the insights so you can share some of the thinking behind what's in those pages.
Sure, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, great. So first up, before getting into the book itself, I just wanted to ask you, what was your motivation and what was the background to you writing this book and writing it now? And then also the reason behind the title, why Di-volution?
Lovely questions. I almost never get asked why I wrote the book. I guess I was born to be a teacher. And then I found out that I couldn't feed my family by doing that. So I had to go and get, I guess, what people would call a real job. But I've always had a dual personality where I've always been a teacher at university. And so way back in the 90s, I started teaching at Wits Business School. And I've been a business school facilitator since then. And I've taught something like 50,000 people. And then I realized that analog model can't scale. And that if I wanted to get my message out there to as many people as possible, and I create this legacy, the only way to do that was to create my content, embed it, and share it as broadly as possible electronically. And that's the reason that I basically wrote the book and created a number of videos and a podcast series, was really to get the message out. Because I think, the amazing thing, there's very few things in the world that you can share that cost you nothing. One of them, by the way, is a smile. Right? I can smile and it immediately makes you're smiling because I'm smiling, right? And I gave it to you, it cost me nothing, and it changed your mood a little bit. And I feel knowledge is very similar. It cost me nothing to create it, and once I've created it, to give it to somebody else cost me nothing. And so that's really why I did that. In terms of and obviously I felt many people never realized how fast this was happening, how complex it was, but how simple it was to respond to it. And I wanted to get the essence of it, to dilute, I guess, the oceans of the world of digital into a droplet of water, into a 240-page book, 60,000 words. I know this now, and basically allow people to digest this, because there was just so much to understand. The second, and in your second question, Di-volution really comes from the synthesis of two words: digital evolution. Because what I found was that although people spoke about this as disruption, the fact of the matter is that it's not as if this suddenly, jumped out of the earth, right, fully formed. That's not the way this happened. The way that this happened was a large number of iterations, pivots, changes, and mergers, acquisitions, businesses going bankrupt, new businesses, new funding rounds. And so all of these evolved. And it evolved through multiple numbers of changes, very similar to biological evolution. And so what I wanted to point out to many people, especially corporates, was you yourself can evolve. It's not like your present form is cast in stone and can't be changed. And that's really, the book was written for two audiences, really. I guess the one audience, which is the entrepreneur, the startup, and the professional, and the other is this big corporate that's trying to figure out what to do. And so I use the concept of digital evolution. And the reason I picked the butterfly was really, the butterfly for me, there were two reasons for that. One was the butterfly effect, that small changes, small things can have huge impact. And so, it was important about getting started, because that, has an exponential effect. But also, butterflies start as caterpillars, and then they go through a process of metamorphosis where they dilute the entire insides of their body, and then they rewire the entire body and come out as a butterfly. Well, that's what corporates have to do. And so the concept of the butterfly and digital evolution really resonated for me, and that's why.
No, I want to say I think that's a great picture, and I think not only for corporates but also for entrepreneurs. The world is so different now, and the opportunities are so, I think, different, but also enormously immense for entrepreneurs. And now's the time to go after them. Just with the increased number of people that have joined, I just want to quickly do a check-in just on the process for the meeting. So just for the audience, please put all your questions that you'd like to pose to Herman in the chat box in the Q&A. And then what we're going to do is for the last 15 minutes, we're going to open the floor to questions. But if there's a question that comes up that's really relevant to the topic that we're discussing, we'll pull that question into the discussion as we go to keep the session as informal as possible. But one thing I just wanted to share with the audience, I read the book over the weekend. I want to say, I said to Herman just before we started, it's such a great read. I so enjoyed it. And the build-up of sharing first, like what forces here are in play, and then explaining practically what does that mean for you, the SME, and also you, the corporate. And then the most interesting part for me, like, what is the end game? How does this pan out? Who are the winners and who are the losers? And, you know, just because you're at either side of the table, there are definitely huge steps that you can make to ensure that you will end up being on the winning side of the table. So it's very interested to unpack this with him. But please, everyone, ask your questions, put them in the chat box, and then we'll get to them with 15 minutes at the end, or else through the discussion. So then the first piece is digitization and this digital transformation we're in. It's going at an accelerated pace. I mean, spurred on by the pandemic, by the innovation in the tech space itself. What I'd love to understand is just you sharing your perspective on these forces at play, and how these forces have such different impact and opportunity for entrepreneurs versus large corporates. And yeah, always, like in your book, you brought this to life through such great examples. Would love to hear a few examples of this. And then obviously your advice for the entrepreneurs. Where should they double down their focus?
So I think the world's going through three fundamental phases here. But these three phases in recent times are really part of a 200-year journey. You know, if you go back 200 years ago, we went through a process of mechanization. And mechanization basically involved finding ways that we could use machines to augment human physical muscles. Then we went through a process of automation. And automation started, you know, in the 1950s and 60s and 70s with computers, right? And even mine started using them. And what we started to do is from augmenting human muscles, we began to augment human brains. We said, how can a single person do the work of many? Well, mechanization. How can a single person's thinking do the work of many? Automation. And then we came to the world of digitization, and I'll talk more about that just now. So the first thing to understand is that we're on a 200-year journey, and you're taking a snapshot of like the last, let's call it 30 years. In the last 30 years, we've had three micro cycles. So we've got these super cycles, but we've got these three micro cycles. And the first big cycle started in like the mid-90s. And what we saw in the mid-90s was Clayton Christensen wrote this amazing book about the innovator's dilemma. And what he said was, if you build a bottom player, and if you can build a low-cost airline or a Formula One hotel, and you remove surplus components, you can disrupt an industry. And so that first layer of disruption was around value, saying, we've over-engineered things. Let's just make them simpler, come up with lower costs, and build minimum value propositions. Well, that started 25 years ago. Then around 2000, 2002, we found the world of the hyperscalers and the big aggregators. And this was this world of the Amazons, where what they did was they aggregated vast amounts of selection and choice and put it in one place. And then now, because of the evolution of technology, we're coming up with the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, who are now fundamentally changing the way in which people buy things, the way in which people think about things, the way in which people consume things. And these are the three different phases that have happened. And the forces that have driven that are really, the first one is obviously technology. If you think about it, it's really, yes, we all know it's about information, but there's only four things you can do with information. You can capture it, you can send it somewhere, you can process it, and you can store it. And really, you know, we've got ways now of sending information is free, effectively. Storing information is free. I mean, you can get a 1 terabyte memory stick, and processing information is free. For a few dollars, you can set up a really powerful stack on Amazon. And so effectively, technology became free. when technology became free and customers started using apps and devices that captured vast amounts of data, well, data capture became free. So the four things you could do with data: capture, send, process, and store, became free. Well, the minute that happened, barriers to entry plummeted in multiple industries. Because up until now, the ability to do those four things were restricted to very large companies. And suddenly anybody was able to do that. From a garage, you could just build anything. And because of the way in which consumers had adopted smart devices, we were suddenly able, anyone who built something could get it into an app store and appeal to a market of billions. And that fundamentally changed the world. And it opened up the world in many ways. So you've got a world of devices, technology, and of course, what then happened is people went back to 95 and they said, hey, some of the things that, that Southwestern Airlines did actually applies to taxi industries, and it applies to Airbnb. And then we realized, there's a lot of actual stranded assets in the world. People have spare time. People have cars that they're not using. People have holiday homes they're not using. People have boats and airplanes they're not fully using. Isn't there a way through sharing that we could build new things? And so we were able to use technology to basically leverage stranded assets, look at opportunities, and basically find pain points and solve them. And if you look at large companies, they're doing the same things, right? Amazon started as a small company, but no one ever talks about this. But no one ever talks about the poor, sorry, excuse my French, but the poor bastards that have to compete against Amazon. What about those guys, right? And so in the book, I talk about Best Buy as one of the companies, a legacy company that really embraced this digitization, digital transformation journey. And what they did, really powerful. You would think, one of the worst products to sell, if you look at industry, disruption and margin compression, the dog industry is the sale of consumer electronic and consumer digital devices. Selling cell phones is a mug's game. Yet here's a company that was able to sell these things with physical stores, and actually their share price is doing fantastically, right? They've actually had a share split recently. Now, why is Best Buy able to do this? Here's a legacy company that competed brilliantly. And the answer is that they basically recognize that the one thing that Amazon can't do, and this is a blue ocean play, right? When you're competing against the startup, and I'm talking to the corporates, right? When you're competing against the startup or like Amazon, that's got scale, the question is, what can't they do? And what they can't do is they can't give you face-to-face. They can't deal with the laggards in the industry who don't understand the tech, who don't know how to set up the equipment, who don't have trust, who haven't made up their mind. They can't make up their mind online. How do you help them? How do you train them? How do you kind of say to them, take this home, try it out. If it doesn't work, come back. How do you give them a go-to guy? I mean, I go to Incredible Connection. I've got a go-to guy at Incredible. I say, listen, I'm not sure which printer to buy because I'm not a printer specialist, and I've got a go-to guy. And so I think there are many ways in which companies can pivot in this space and change. But I think there's a lot more to that story. But I want you to get to your second question. I'm going to just talk for 45 minutes. Alison, you're on mute.
There we go. No, so I want to say thanks so much. And then just moving on, to the next chapter in the book, as Herman was saying, this is all referred to like in the war zone. The next phase is the battlefield. So where really do all these parties play, and what are the rules of engagement? So can you talk a little bit more about this digital warping that you see happening? And how does that really impact mostly the entrepreneurs?
Right. So digital warping is, if you think about a battlefield, there's a lay of the land, and the trick to winning war, I guess, is where do you put your resources and how do you make sure that you get an advantage? And if you look at take tank warfare as an example, the rule always used to be that if you wanted to win a war, you needed to have 3 times more ammo, soldiers, tanks, planes than the enemy. Well, Operation Desert Storm turned that entire thing on its head, because the Americans arrived with 1,000 tanks and the Iraqis were fully bedded down. They were in position. They were dictating the battlefield, and they had 3,000 tanks. So the Americans had 1/3 of the number of tanks of the Iraqis. And in theory, they had 9 times too few tanks. And this war should never happen. This is one of the biggest tank wars in the world. The tank war was over in 100 hours. And effectively, they destroyed the entire Iraqi army. And the reason that they destroyed the entire Iraqi army is they used technology. They basically changed the rules of the game. They control the air. They were able to use heat-seeking missiles. They were able to pinpoint where the tanks were. They were able to use the M1A1 Abrams tank. And people don't realize this, but the M1A1 tank is a 40-ton tank. It's 40 tons. I mean, the brain boggles at this, right? It's like 10 Audi Q7s, right? It is one machine, and it's got this automated rate of fire. You can put a can of beer on the barrel, and you can drive this tank, at 40 or 50 kilometers an hour, or even 80 kilometers. You won't spill any beer. Right? And the reason you won't spill any beer is because of the gyroscopically controlled barrel. And so they used this amazing ability where you could look and point and shoot, and they were able to shoot and fire and find tanks far faster. So the rules of combat changed. Now that's how it works in war. Now let's talk about business. In business, similarly, legacy companies have laid out their forces, they've picked the battlefield, they've got the regulations, they've got the laws. Well, and they were set. They were the Iraqi army here, right? We are in position. You got to come to us. We're not moving. Now, that's a huge problem. If you've got to move, your supply chain normally in a battlefield has got to be stretched. This is why the Germans lost the war against the Russians. And so in theory, the fortune should favor the embedded player who's defending. What happens in business is the first thing that's happened is regulatory arbitrage. All these companies were sitting behind laws. The first law said you need a telecommunication license to carry calls, but you don't need a telecommunication license to carry traffic on the internet. Oh, that's interesting. I'll convert a call through TCP/IP into a packet, and using a packet-based system, I can have phone calls that way. You need a license to broadcast TV. Yes, but what if I don't use radio spectrum, but instead I use, fiber? Because now I'm just transmitting my video through packets again. And so packet-based technology replaced radio licenses, TV licenses, and telecommunication licenses. We're seeing the same thing happen in banking. You see, banking laws govern who is allowed to take deposits. It doesn't govern who's allowed to switch payments, who's allowed to lend money, who's allowed to be in insurance. It governs who's allowed to take payment. Who's allowed to take deposits. And so this concept of regulatory arbitrage was challenged. And companies, startups came along and said, I'm going to change the rules. I'm going to find the gaps in the industry and rename, redefine, and live in the shadows. Or where, in the case of M-Pesa, for example, where the rules are ill-defined. Right. And so, it's not legal. It's not illegal. It is illegal. Illegal means we're not sure what this thing is. It's not legal or illegal. It's just not defined. And crypto, by the way, falls into that very nicely. And we see a lot of this happening. The other thing that's happening, of course, is you've got industry collision and you've got value chain compression. So value chain compression says what used to take 100 units of output can now be done with 1 unit of output. If you look at the amount of effort it takes, for example, to buy a book, the way we used to buy it, get out of your bed, drive to the mall, park your car, walk to Exclusive. Hopefully somebody greets you at the door and says, hello, Herman, welcome back. Last time you were in my shop, you bought this. People who bought this also bought this. No, there's no guy like this. There's no guy like this, right? But there's a guy like that in the Kindle. I can sit in bed, open it up. Hi, Herman, welcome back. You should read this book next. So you've got context, you've got advisory. And so what happens is these companies realize that we've got to move from a world of transactional and reporting to a world of advisory and context. If you can guess what people want to do, you can tell them what to do next. And so they changed the rules of the game completely. You had a whole bunch of people focusing on taking transactions and generating reports, and along came companies who said, no, I'm going to give you insight. I'm not going to give you hindsight. I'm going to give you insight, and I'm going to give you foresight. So the rules of the game started to change. And then I guess the one big thing that changed was many companies had built products that they sold, and along came all of these companies, these new startups, and their product became a feature of somebody else's platform. So in other words, a phone call became a feature of WhatsApp. It wasn't, it was Vodacom's or the telco industry's product, and it suddenly became a feature of the WhatsApp platform, which by the way also exists in Skype and Zoom, etc., etc. And so products become features that are free on somebody else's platform. Well, your industry is toast. And that's kind of what happened with Kodak, right? Is the product became a feature. And so, I could carry on, but these are just some examples of how the entire landscape fundamentally shifted. And so, you basically lost air cover, you had infrared, And in fact, the fact that you were dug in became a disadvantage because you weren't agile. And that's exactly the description for many companies, unfortunately, legacy companies today.
No, and I mean, also the case, the entrepreneurs, they've got much more to gain than they've got to lose because they're still building. Whereas the other, the other way around is the case for the corporates. And so the risk appetite is just so much higher. So they can go and play in these gray zones without that much downside. Whereas corporates, it's very difficult. So I just think there's so much opportunity that sits in these spaces. And I think the financial services industry is an industry that's got so many examples of those gray spaces.
Yeah. And in fact, I was talking to a bank just now, and I made the point that the financial services industry plays not to lose, while startups play to win. And I said it's a fundamentally different way of thinking. And I can talk about that later when we talk about perverse incentives.
Yeah, no, exactly. So then, just moving on to some of the characteristics or what you need to have as an entrepreneur in this time to succeed. And you talk about ambidexterity. And what's key to your organization is to have this to be able to succeed. So won't you talk a little bit about what you mean by this, and then what it enables you to actually do, and specifically focusing on an entrepreneur? I'd love you to also just talk through one or two entrepreneurial businesses that have done this, exceptionally well.
Sure. I think I wish I picked a word that was easier to pronounce than ambidexterity, but having picked it, now we're stuck with it. So I mean, it really talks to the fact that companies are challenged with trying to do two things. On the one hand, they have to perform, and on the other hand, they have to transform. Now, the problem with perform and transform is they actually are, and the one is an antithesis of the other. Because to transform, I have to change, I have to move, I have to pivot, I have to move into uncertainty. I probably have to use new technology I've never used before. I've got to test, I've got to experiment. That's what transforms about. It's about changing. Perform is about stacking it high, sell it cheap, keep the costs down, focus on reliability, sustainability, repeatability, and doing the same thing over and over again and removing risk, right? And so these worlds don't live comfortably in the same world. It's very similar, I guess, to a person who's ambidextrous, right? My left hand is absolutely useless, but my son is ambidextrous. He plays cricket and he plays squash with his left hand, which really irritates me because halfway through the game he switches, and suddenly he becomes a right-hand player, right? And they should change the rules of that game. And the problem that you got is if you're ambidextrous at squash, you can cover the entire court, right? If you only play with your right hand, you got a real disadvantage. It's the same in cricket, right? If you're an ambidextrous player in cricket, you can bat with both hands. That's a huge advantage. The same in boxing, by the way. In boxing, right-hand boxers only meet a left-hand boxer about 7% of the time, but left-handed boxers meet right-handed boxers 93% of the time. And so left-handed boxers have this huge advantage. So I use the word, I picked this ambidextrous analogy for a number of reasons. And one of them was this concept that actually we're all really good at perform, but we're really bad at transform. So if you really want to win in the world, the trick is to be good at both. Because, if you take a startup's got to solve basically 4 fundamental problems, which I call fit problems. The first fit problem is getting the problem solution fit, right? And so in other words, I've got a problem. Here's how I think I could fit it. Maybe there's an MVP in there somewhere. The second is the team business fit. You've got to figure out who's on the team. And I like to refer to the 3 H's. Every startup should have 3 H's on the team. It's the hackster, the hacker, the hipster, and the hustler, right? You need these 3 people. And if you don't have them in the second fit, you're going to lose, right? The hacker can crack any technical problem. The hipster is going to make this thing look really sexy and customer experience is going to be amazing. And the hustler is going to help you sell the business, raise capital, and sell it to customers. You need these 3 people. If you don't have these 3 people, you toast. So you got to get through problem solution fit, team business fit. You got to get through product market fit, which we all know about. And then finally, you've got to get to business model, stroke distribution, and opportunity fit, which is a scaling problem. So the problem that you've got is in the very early stages, it's like playing, but later on it gets serious. And you can see this at companies like like Facebook, right? They kind of lost the plot halfway through the game because they were just focused on transform. They didn't know how to perform. And I question whether they've got that perform side yet, because they haven't dealt with consumer protection, regulation. It always feels to me like children dealing with the regulators. I think, how do you not know this? How do you not know that you can't share my information, right? It's a perform issue. So if I look at companies like, take, OneCart as an example. This was an organization. It was a one-man show. They went out. They started. They basically offered a service that said, people don't feel like getting out of bed and going to the mall, but they've got to go to the mall because there's no website out there that allows them to shop at every shop in the mall with one bill, right? And no one does. I can go to Discam online. I can go to ShopRite online. I go to Pick and Pay online, but I can't do them all in one place. And so what this team did is they basically built an app that allows you to go to one app, and you're able to shop at any shop in that mall. They then send somebody else to shop for you, and you get one bill, and they'll deliver it to your home. Now that's brilliant. They'll even do your dry cleaning, by the way, and they'll come and fetch your dry cleaning and drop your dry cleaning. Amazing business. Now, obviously, when COVID hit, these people went ballistic, right? A very similar story to what happened at Bottles. And a lot of these companies went through a very similar phase. Now, I lived with this problem when I was involved with Jumia. Jumia was a company that we listed in 2019 on the New York Stock Exchange. I was the deputy chairman. We listed that company for about $4 billion. It's still worth $4 billion today through COVID and everything else. And the important thing is that we went through exactly this problem. When we started out building Jumia, which is a take-a-lot running in 15 countries, basically, we basically went out and we launched a business that was live in 15 African countries simultaneously. And the problem we were trying to solve was, well, we're trying to solve the offline to online problem, right? We're trying to solve the fact that everything's offline. Can we take all offline businesses online? We made a lot of mistakes, and we kind of figured out, wow, we can't carry all this inventory. We can't manage so many territories. We've got too many verticals. We had retail plus marketplace plus classifieds, all running listing services, all running simultaneously. And so we realized very quickly that we needed to cut everything back, exit markets, cut down verticals. We had 10 different brands. We had to cut all the brands. And so this transition, this amazing, wonderful, exciting period of transform has at some point got to move into perform. And that is tough. You're going to make very hard decisions. And we went through this phase in 2016, 17, and 18, where we had to transform, we had to change the business to a perform mode. And all of a sudden, it's like a teenager becoming an adult. That was quite tricky. Of course, legacy companies, corporates, have to go the opposite way. They're really good at perform, right? They don't know how to transform. I mean, go and look at any bank, any telco in the world, and ask them what percentage of your revenue came from services that didn't exist 5 years ago. If they give you a double-digit answer, they're lying, right? Because very few of them, I mean, maybe you could argue that, okay, telcos have launched data, but data existed before that. So show me something new that's now making up more than 10% of your revenue. And the answer is it's not there. Go and look at Microsoft, go and look at Google, go and look at Facebook and Apple. I mean, the answer is 30, 40, 50, 60% of their revenue comes from products that didn't exist 5 years ago. That's a great example of a perform, transform model. And to get this right, what startups have to do is they've got to develop a dual mindset. And this comes back to the ambidexterity problem. You've got to have a fixed and a growth mindset simultaneously. The large companies have a fixed mindset, which means they're very good at building one thing and getting it hyper efficient. And you need people with a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is not a bad thing. I don't want to board a plane where the pilot says, hey folks, I've got a growth mindset. I went to this webinar. This weird guy called Herman Singh came on. He says, I've got to have a growth mindset. You know what? I never filed a flight plan today. We're going to go see where we end up. We're going to have a vote, and let's see where most of you want to go. We'll go there. Number one, I don't even have a checklist today. I'm not checking. I'm just guessing that we've got enough fuel. You know what? I don't want to hear people in a nuclear power station say, I wonder what this button does, right? So in other words, there are thousands of industries where a fixed mindset is exactly what you want. Doctors, lawyers, nuclear plant operators, pilots, etc., have to have a fixed mindset. But you got to have a growth mindset as well. You got to be questioning and challenging and exploring the unknown. And the trick is everybody emphasizes the growth mindset, and we start to denigrate the fixed mindset. And the fact of the matter is you need both, right? I've seen, a whole bunch of artists who all starve because none of them know how to make money. You can't build a company with only hackers. You can't build a company with only hipsters, and you can't build a company with only hustlers. You need all three. And I hope that kind of puts some context around the answer to that question.
No, thanks so much. And I think that that makes it very clear. I think everyone does focus on the growth aspect and always being innovative and always looking at the next new thing. But it's always 80% of the revenue usually comes from one of the products. And yes, you've got to have many in the pipe, but those ones in the pipe will then be the future revenue streams. So I'm curious if we can just start looking forward, like more to the end game. And I must say, I found that section of your book just so enthralling to read. But there are a couple of principles that you talk about there, or new terminologies that you talk about in that section. So, I mean, it's really like, where do you see this all going? But before you talk about that, just you talk that the digital future is built on value nets. Please, can you, I mean, love if you can share just a little bit more about what you see these value nets are, and why you see these as playing such an important role in the future, and then also just, therefore the implications for entrepreneurs.
Sure. Look, I think what the problem for many of us is we live short lives and we have short memory spans. And so what happens is we think today is normal. The reality is today is abnormal. What we value today is not what our parents valued. It's not what our grandparents valued. It's not what our ancestors valued. Our ancestors valued caves. They valued fire. They valued, a mammoth that had died last week, right? From old age, right? I mean, they valued sharp stones. We've got to really think about this, right? The things that are important to us change. And so we think that, well, today is going to be the way it's always going to be. Money is going to be important. Well, actually, money is a theoretical construct. Money doesn't exist. I mean, when I tell people that, they freak out. And they go, oh, cyber currencies are real. I go, typically, cyber currencies aren't real either. Money is a fictitious thing that we've created. In the same way, gold is a fictitious thing that we've created. So it all cuts back to the point of what is value. Well, last year, around May, the most valuable thing on the planet, because demand grew 900%, right, was toilet paper. And so, the most valuable thing on the planet was toilet paper. People in the Muslim world who don't even use toilet paper, right? We're like, why are people freaking out about toilet paper? Value. And so the point I'm making is what we value changes. Money is merely a mechanism to establish price. So you got to think about this. Money is not something that's natural. We don't need money. There's a reason, for example, in Star Trek, I've got to get this right. In Star Trek, there is no money, right? There's no money that's used anyway, because money is not a requirement to build an ecosystem, but value is. So we've got to separate out value from money. And my argument is that increasingly what we're starting to find is things that we thought had value, like a physical book, or this presentation, or knowledge, or ideas, actually over time, as we automate them, they become free. And so more and more things that used to have value become free. And they become free because of this amazing technology. And so we all panic and we go like, this thing's, we're not making any money. We go, well, actually, you got to really think about this very carefully, because money is something we created to establish price. That's the only reason that money exists, is to establish price, right? If everything's free, you don't need money, right? So why then does money exist? And so in the future, my argument is, you're going to find that value will change. Value might shift to, advice. It might shift. If you think about the world of 10 years ago, the value was associated with transactions. I did a presentation yesterday at a launch to I think 150 CFOs. And I said to them, 10 years ago, your job, that was the part of your job that was valued, was, can you process all the transactions? Can you generate all the reports? Can you make sure we fully comply? I said, in the future, what people are going to value is not that stuff, because the AI engines, the machine learning engines, the robotic process automation engines, and the big ERP systems are going to do that. What are you going to do? How are you going to be valued? What's going to differentiate you? What's going to differentiate you is you're going to have to become a catalyst for change. You're going to have to provide insight and foresight, and you're going to have to start becoming a strategist. You're going to have to add value in a new way. So the salary is being paid to the person, but he's doing something fundamentally different. And I think that's going to happen to all of us. And we all need to recognize that almost every product, service, and job is going to fundamentally shift. And in some cases, you're going to end up with people that we don't need to do anything. It's okay. We actually don't need you to do anything, right? Because these, if you go to Saldanha Steel, I was the project director to build Saldanha Steel. We built a steel plant that produced billions of dollars of output that employed 100 people. Well, what did if you went to Vanderbijl Park and you looked at that steel plant, it employed thousands of people. Well, we didn't need them. That didn't mean that they were useless. It meant we didn't need them, right? So, and so society's got to figure out a solution. What do you do with people who aren't needed to do anything? Because doing nothing may actually be okay. You're going to have to be, keep society going, etc. But we're going to have to figure this out. So value for me is the real point here. And that's what a value net is. I think, a payment is merely a movement of value or a reward for the delivery of value. And in the future, you're going to start finding that we're going to start sharing without payment. We're already starting to see this, right? In many peer networks, and a lot of open source systems are sharing value without payment. I think you're going to find that happening a lot more.
No, it's very interesting. And I mean, my next question was just going to be, how far out is this future? I mean, some of these things we're already starting to see, like in a small, here and there. But I mean, just if you had 2030, yeah. 2050, like, and obviously it's huge. No one's got a crystal ball, but curious to hear.
Well, 3 comments. First comment, the future is already here. It's just not, evenly spread, right? So a lot of what I'm describing is happening already, right? Already, YouTube has free content, right? You got thousands of people who are prosumers, millions of people are prosumers. They're producers and consumers simultaneously, and they are sharing data and they're sharing content with people, and they're not getting paid, right? And so the world of the future, I think, has exactly this. The second point, I think, is that, so the first comment was the future is here already, it's just not evenly spread. The second point I wanted to make was that the future happens in small pieces, and it happens slowly, and then it happens suddenly. Happens slowly, and then it happens suddenly. And the third point is that the way in which this happens is very similar to an avalanche. It's very similar to a pile of sand, and you put a drop at a time of sand, and then suddenly all the sand suddenly flows away. And so what happens is it starts slowly and it suddenly accelerates away from you. And that's exactly the world that we're going to live in. So the future is happening very slowly, but it's happening suddenly. And that's what we've got to get used to.
No, I mean, just moving on to that, I think you've called out very clearly the sequence that you see this disruption or affecting the different institutions and industries. So we'd love for you to also just talk through, I mean, you call out marketing or maybe advertising within marketing to being the first industry that's really affected by this, given, the structure of that industry and how it works. So we'd love for you to just talk about the sequence of how you see this playing out across the different industries, but most importantly, why? So why what's driving that sequencing?
Yeah, it's useful looking backwards to see what happened in the past in order to project what happens in the future. So if you look back, the first industry that really got disrupted was media. And the reason for that was we were able to digitize content. We were able to take photographs and digitize them. We were able to take music, books, videos, and make digital versions of analog content. The reason that was powerful was the minute you digitize something, two things happen. Firstly, I can make a second copy free. So the marginal cost of another unit of output becomes free. And the second point is I can move it freely anywhere in the world. So it becomes frictionless. So the ability to make something frictionless and to make the marginal cost of zero fundamentally transformed media. So media got hit by this process of digitization. The second industry that got hit was communications. That was the second industry. And the reason for that was we'd built an analog industry that was moving voice calls. And suddenly we were able to use packetized systems and take a voice call and convert it into a data stream. And by converting a voice call into a data stream, we similarly did the same thing. We made location irrelevant, because it doesn't cost you more to send an email to Durban versus sending an email to New York, but it costs you more to send a postcard to New York versus sending a postcard to Durban. That's the difference between a phone call and a voice call over the internet. And so that's what destroyed the communications revenue. We then saw the next industry that got nailed was retail. And the reason for that was you suddenly could create an infinitely long shelf. You had a shelf that was, you know, a kilometer long. It didn't matter how much of merchandise. You had infinite amount of merchandise. It didn't matter anymore. And so because the minute you virtualize stock in that way, it didn't matter how much of stock you could carry. And so the long tail came into play. The third industry that we think is going to get hit is banking and insurance. That's really the next big thing, because travels all got smashed way back in the late 90s as well. So banking and insurance, I think, is going to be the next industry that's taking a big hit, mainly because same problem, right? They are dealing with cash. We saw during COVID that ATMs just are dying out all over the world. Right? Because nobody's drawing cash, because nobody wants to be contaminated with the COVID virus. And so the ATM industry is collapsing. In fact, governments are now passing laws to make ATMs compulsory, because banks want to get rid of ATMs and they want to get rid of cash. In England, they're making it mandatory to keep cash because poor people don't have bank accounts and they need cash, whereas the wealthier people tend not to use cash. And so the banking and insurance industry, I think, is going through the same kind of digitization challenge. I see this moving rapidly into, you know, I think insurance in particular is going to go through a major transformation, because the entire insurance industry is based on calculation of risk and really powerful formulae that are embedded in the head of actuarial scientists. Well, today I can replicate that with you know, AI engines, machine learning algorithms, and just big data, using vast amounts of data. So I can compute what the risk is of something happening, what the probability is of something happening, and I can better compute the possibility of a loan non-repayment, or the potential of somebody dying, or a car accident occurring, and therefore I'm able to price that far better than any insurance company can, because the insurance company, unfortunately, groups people into pools, and it calculates a risk for the pool that you're in. But today we're getting to a point where I can actually tell you what your risk profile is today, because today, while you're driving, the traffic happens to be worse. And there's a lot of people who happen to be, I guess, I don't know, there was a big party yesterday, therefore more people are drunk this morning, etc. Right? So we see that industry taking quite a big hit. Obviously, you know, the legal and audit industry is going to be heavily hit by artificial intelligence, and the health industry is going to be heavily influenced by the Internet of Medical Things, the IOMT. So in other words, because so much of technology and devices and sensors are being attached to our lives, you know, I mean, I heard the other day that people are now putting sensors into toilets, and it's actually a very clever thing to do, because if I can tell how your body, I can tell how your body is functioning by analyzing your waste. I can tell whether your liver is working properly, your bladder is working properly, whether your digestive system is working properly. Actually, if I did this to everyone, I'd have an amazing insight into your life. I think in the future that may become compulsory, right? That in fact, if you want to get lower insurance, I need to put this into your toilet, because otherwise there's no other way to know what you're actually eating. And so I think these industries are going to be changed. And of course, you know, over time, education is going to become free, and we need to brace ourselves for that.
I want to say, I think it's the most interesting thing to think through which industries are going to be impacted next, just driven by the transparency, and also compounded by the reducing costs of just transferring the information and have better and better access to information. But a few questions have come up from the floor. The first one I wanted to call out is from Ryan Falkenberg, who's the CEO of Clever. And sorry, the question is that he's called out is, given this future, what can we as South African entrepreneurs leverage through our location advantage? Like what, or what do you see as the competitive advantages that us as South African entrepreneurs have that we really should be leveraging?
Great question. There's a couple of answers to that. I mean, I think, you know, diversity is a powerful thing. Our ability to work with 11 official languages, we pretty much have every race group on earth in one country, right? And it's a small country. And so that's a huge advantage. Our ability for sunshine is really important, especially if we move to solar power, because we have, you know, 300 sunny days a year. I mean, people in South Africa don't realize that's probably the highest incidence of sunlight in the world. I mean, why we aren't building solar factories everywhere to export power, or to produce industries, or to create industries that are energy intensive. I know it's the exact opposite of what you would think of doing, given the state of Eskom, but actually it's a very logical thing for South Africans to do. We should be building aluminium smelters based on sunlight in the Karoo, which, by the way, is exactly where I am right now. We should be looking at things like the fact that we have a very neutral accent. as people love my accent. I go all over. I mean, I work in probably 50, 60 countries a year, and I often say to people, you know, why do you kind of think that anything I say would be interesting? They said there's a reason that Americans love British people. They're either villains or heroes. So we just love your accent, right? We love the British accent. Well, South Africans, most people can't place our accent. It's very neutral. We don't sound like British. We don't sound like Australians. We don't sound like Americans. And that's a powerful thing. The ability to kind of have an accent that everybody can understand. I often don't understand Americans. And if you know, depending on where you live in England, I'm not even sure that's English anymore, right? The accent, the dialect is so strong, and the way in which words are pronounced, it's impossible to understand it. You know, you've dealt with some Indian call centers. I can say this, right? I don't understand what they say. I'm sorry, could you say that word again for the fifth time? So accent for me is very powerful. We have a great cost position, and from a time point of view, we're very lucky. You know, if you wake up at like 4 in the morning, you catch the tail end of the Far East, and if you go to bed at kind of 10 o'clock at night, you can start working you can do a lot of work in California. So we're in a great position. I can carry on. I mean, I think we've got cost advantages, we've got tech advantages. I think we've got space on our side, and I mean, if you go and look at the number of people per square kilometer in South Africa, and you talk to people from India, and you say, "Why are you coming to South Africa?" They say, "Do you know how crowded India is? Do you know how empty your country? Your country is totally empty." Right? And so we've got this amazing country. And I mean, I could carry on. We've got amazing resources. People in South Africa don't realize this, but we are like the fourth biggest producer of gold. We're the biggest producer of aluminium. We're the biggest producer of chrome. We're the biggest producer. We're one of the biggest producers of nickel. We produce platinum, palladium, rhodium. And we are one of the world's biggest producers. We are the biggest producer of diamonds. I can carry on, right? And so there's this wonderful opportunity to value add to all of these items. I can carry on, but there's lots of opportunity in this country. That's why I'm still here.
Fantastic, and it's always a good reminder, and it's good for us to focus on those things. And I think what you were mentioning about call centers and language, and also the time zone, it's something that's really falling into a big role in the president's 4IR plan, and he's calling out that BPO industry is one of the top industries for driving employment and revenue creation, specifically now with the increased demand for that specific service. But I just want to quickly just talk through the second question that we've got from the floor, from Marcus Bender. He says, "Hi Herman, do you think blockchain will play a fundamental role in the future with regard to value creation because it creates trust? Or do you see it's going to be created through a different mechanism?"
So I can't see a replacement for a blockchain. I mean, it's just such a logical construct. The concept of the blockchain is powerful because it's trusted third parties. It's a shared network. It's non-repudiatable, non-fungible transactions, date-stamped, time-stamped, written into a distributed ledger, visible, transparent, shareable, and it can be very fast. Now, obviously, Bitcoin is a terrible example of a blockchain implementation. So I tend, I say to people, you shouldn't use Bitcoin in any way to describe how a blockchain works, because it's just such a terrible example, given the amount of energy that it uses, given how slow it is, given how you bulk it up, given the number of nodes on the network. Bitcoin's a bad example of a blockchain. But blockchain in itself, especially if you add blockchain to tokenized assets. So the extent to which you can tokenize assets and put them onto a blockchain is very powerful. So if you look at things like trade finance, you look at things like land transfer, car sales, over time, as we get the blockchain infrastructure to become blockchain as a service, open APIs, tokenization becomes a lot easier. I think we're going to be stunned at what gets tokenized. A good example, by the way, is take something like music. One of the hardest things in the world to get back are the royalties for artists. I think there's enormous leakage in the world. If one could take music and tokenize it in such a way and embed it into a blockchain, so that every piece of music that came out was attached to a blockchain, you could ensure that you receive royalty every time it was used. But because of the fact that we don't do that, this thing's just hanging out there. Now, so copyright, for example, and the use of intellectual property can be tokenized and put onto a blockchain. Physical assets, any asset where you want shared ownership of it and you want to move ownership of it seamlessly at low cost, a blockchain is a beautiful way to do that. So to me, blockchain is, in my view, going forward, is going to be one of the most powerful forces changing industries, especially industries where you've got multiple players, you take sale of a house and the number of people involved in that transaction. Wherever you've got multiple parties, a blockchain makes so much sense. And there are many industries that work like this, from trade finance to car sales to real estate.
No, absolutely agree. And I think if you're to take that to an extreme, you think about shipping and what it takes to move containers around the world. It's often even more complicated than the estate transaction. So there's a huge amount of value to be generated just through having the trust and the right record. But then just getting back to the end game, because I found the last chapter, or the last two chapters in your book, such a great read. And so I just wanted you to share with the audience just that landscape that you see in the future of businesses, like what it looks like and why. Like, why the few big businesses? So why a few big winners that really have this access to these seas of data? And so it's almost like a winner takes all.
It is, if you think about it, Facebook is number one in their industry. There's no number two. Pinterest is number one. There's no number two. Twitter is number one for news. There's no number two. PayPal's number one. There's no number two. I mean, I can carry on industry after industry. This is a winner take all industry. It's a land grab. The minute you get to 60%, you run away with the market. Now, the key point to bear in mind is each of these companies I've mentioned is a use case. It's one use case. Over time, I see a couple of things happening. The first thing that's happening is I think all of these use cases are going to merge. I don't know if you saw how quickly Facebook took out Periscope. Periscope was about live streaming. All that Facebook did was they took the Periscope functionality and built it into Facebook, and they killed Periscope almost overnight. Right? And you're going to start to see these kinds of things happening. You're going to start to see, in a way, the way to think of this is each of these super apps, each of these apps is actually a bubble. It's like a drop on a table. And over time, these drops are going to merge until you're going to get a puddle, and the puddles will merge until you get a kind of dam and a lake and a sea and an ocean. And it's going to happen because users are going to get sick and tired of using multiple apps, number one. Number two, the apps are going to struggle to follow you throughout your life. Twitter doesn't know what I do when I'm in a retail store. They don't know what I'm doing at night. They don't know what I'm doing when I'm driving. So Twitter actually misses a huge amount of insight into my life. So the winners are going to be those that gain the most insight. So the future belongs to whichever company gets the most insight. And if you think about the front row of the Formula One grid, the front two rows, I think they make probably 99% of all the money earned sits in the front two rows of that grid. If you go and look at if you go and look at what just happened to football, you find that the top 4 or 5 teams have just broken away. Why? Because the top 4 or 5 teams win all the games. If you go and look at the NBL, you find the same thing. You look at National Hockey League, you find the same thing. If you go and look at the movies, the top 5 movies make pretty much all the money in the movie industry. You look at the top 20 singers in the world, they're making all the money in the world. You look at the top 50 books in the world, it's making all the money. So we live in a world that's already a winner-take-all world, right? The top players are winning everything. Why? Because it's about visibility. It's about the fact that they're just better. And here's the point. If you can find the thing that makes you win, and you're going to get better at it faster than everybody else. So the guys on the front row of the Formula One grid have more money. They're able to improve their cars by a split second faster than everybody else. The guys writing the best books, to get the best insight, they can write the next books coming after that. The people making the best songs, same thing. They've got the insights, right? Netflix is making the best movies because they've got the best insight in what you watch, what you binge watched, what you watched and then stopped halfway, what you watched and stopped after 5 minutes, and what you just watched the entire series of within 2 weeks, right? So they know these things. And by having that insight, you win. And having insight allows you to win a little bit every day, every year. Over time, what has to happen, it's just a logical thing, is it's insight and context is what's winning. So logically, whoever's got the best insight and best context is going to win, which implies whoever's got the best data and the best algorithms to analyze that data will win. This becomes a scale game. It's very similar to who's going to build the world's best self-driving car. The world's best self-driving car is going to be built by the company with the best data. Whoever's got the best data will automatically build the best self-driving engine. You got to look at which car is driving itself the most, who's got the most miles, who's got the most data built up, who's got the most cars on the road, because whoever's got that is improving faster than the number 2 player, and they're improving faster than the number 3 player, and eventually they get so far ahead, you can't catch them. And so what's going to happen, I think, eventually in the world is you're going to create what I called uninets, which is you're going to get these super aggregation of data where this uninet's going to include a bank, an insurance company, a retailer, and they're going to have this amazing data. And it's going to be basically a super app, very similar to what we're seeing in China. But I think these super apps are going to become hyper apps, right? And they're going to become even bigger because you're going to include everything in one app, because that app, that ecosystem knows everything it needs to know about you to ensure that you move from descriptive statistics or analytics to diagnostic analytics to prescriptive to predictive analytics, eventually to prescriptive analytics. The minute you get to prescriptive analytics, nobody's going to catch you, because prescriptive analytics says I can tell you exactly what you should do, and you're not even going to be able to know why I told you that, but it happens to be true. And whoever can get there first is going to win.
No, I want to say exactly. When the consumers are being informed predictively on their choices, and these algorithms, they're so accurate that, by the way, then you just start believing and listening to them. It's quite in a way a little bit of a scary thought, but it's definitely we are moving in that direction quite quickly. But I mean, then for the entrepreneurs, is your view that as this build is happening, entrepreneurs really look to always partner or sell to or work with the players that you see that really are going to be the big winners? Or do you see there's going to be this period of time where there are going to be many horses in the race? And so just always make sure you're working with the top 5 and you're positioning yourself up there with them. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think, it depends what field you're in, right? So, if you're in, I guess, natural language processing, you got a big problem here. You're up against the big players, and whoever's got the most data is going to be the best at NLP. So you're probably going to start working on a feature. And a lot of what startups need to think about is, what feature am I going to work on? What niche am I going to work on? Because you really got to start thinking about, well, what's my exit plan here, right? How am I going to exit this business? And you got to think about it now. And there's probably a very good chance that your exit plan is going to be, you're going to become a feature of somebody else's product. And these big uninets that I described, they're going to need your feature rather than building it themselves. Exactly what Google is doing. If you look at Google, Amazon, Cisco, all these guys, and you look at the number of companies they buy hundreds of companies a year. And so you got to figure out on how to become the best producer of that feature in that industry.
No, exactly. And those businesses aren't going to stop buying other businesses. So that trend is going to continue. It's going to accelerate as the competition heats up in their spaces, because that's the fastest way for them to drive the innovation. I'm just going to do a last call to questions from the floor, because we're very close to 5 o'clock. But while we're waiting for a few questions, I just wanted to say first, Herman, thank you so much. What a pleasure to just hear your thoughts today, and also meet you and speak to you. It was great. And a reminder for the audience, the book that I picked up, it's not available on the shelves yet. So I want to say very kindly, Herman sent me a copy to read. It is available online through Loot and Take a Lot. But what's exciting is from next week, it's going to be on the shelves in exclusive books. So Herman, well done for already getting it out onto the shelves so quickly. But looking forward to seeing it there. Definitely, we're going to pick up a whole lot of copies for our team. It's a great read, and thanks so much. Cara, I'm not sure if there are any questions that have come in, but if not, I think we just call it, say thank you so much. And I want to say, Herman, I'd love to ask if in a few months' time, if we could have a second discussion. Just, we'd love to hear your insights as you start talking through this book with so many people, and then, how your thinking in the space evolves.
Wonderful. I look forward to that. Thank you so much. And thanks for your time, and thanks to the audience.
Excellent. Thanks, Herman. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Take
everyone.
care now.
And thanks
all.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Alison. Bye now.